The council chamber fell silent the moment Commander Vesic Thorn walked in, his heavy boots striking the polished floor like distant thunder. Every eye in the room turned toward him, yet he did not slow his pace. He moved straight to his seat at the long crescent table, sat down, and said nothing. The other delegates exchanged glances. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. On the opposite side of the chamber, Daniel Cross adjusted his collar and tried to steady his breathing. As the youngest member of the human delegation, he had been warned that alien councils were unpredictable, but nothing had prepared him for the tension now filling the air. He glanced at his colleague, Laura Bennett, who sat beside him, with her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Something happened," she whispered. "Look at his face." Daniel studied Vesic Thorn from across the room. The alien commander's skin, a deep shade of gray with faint blue markings along his jaw, remained expressionless, but his eyes told a different story. They were fixed on the human delegation with an intensity that made Daniel's stomach tighten. For the past 2 hours, the council had been engaged in what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic session. Representatives from a dozen worlds had gathered to finalize a new trade agreement, one that would open several trade routes near Earth's outer colonies. The mood, until recently, had been light. Alien delegates from the Threll Alliance had spent much of the morning making jokes about human military strength, comparing Earth's defense fleet to a child's toy compared to their own war machines. Laughter had echoed through the chamber more than once. Daniel had laughed along with the others, even though it stung a little. He had grown used to it. Every human delegate had. It was simply understood across known space that humanity, while clever and resourceful, was not a species to be feared. Humans were traders, scientists, explorers, never warriors capable of standing against the true powers of the galaxy. But Vesic Thorn had not laughed. Not once. Counselor Bren Tallis, the presiding officer of the session, cleared his throat and attempted to steer the meeting back on track. "Let us continue with the discussion of tariff structures," he said, his voice carrying an authority that usually silenced any lingering murmurs. But this time, the murmurs did not stop. Whispers passed between delegates, quiet questions about why the great Commander Thorn, hero of the Threll Alliance, war leader of a dozen victorious campaigns, looked as though he had seen a ghost. Celevray, a young diplomat sitting near Vesic, finally broke the unspoken rule of silence. She leaned toward him and asked, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Commander, are you unwell?" Vesic did not answer immediately. His gaze remained locked on the human delegation, particularly on Daniel Cross, though the young man had done nothing to draw such attention. Finally, the commander spoke, his voice low and rough, carrying the weight of something long buried. "You laugh," he said, addressing the room rather than Sella. "All of you laugh at them as though they are nothing." The chamber went quiet again, this time completely. Counselor Bren Tallis raised an eyebrow. "Commander Thorn, we are simply discussing trade matters. There is no need to—" "I fought them," Vesic interrupted. His words landed like a physical blow. "I fought humans, not in simulations, not in border disputes settled with words. I fought them in real combat, and I have never spoken of it because I did not think anyone would believe me." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He looked at Laura, whose eyes had widened in disbelief. Around the chamber, delegates from a dozen species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Threll Alliance was known throughout the galaxy as one of the most powerful military forces in existence. Their warriors were bred for combat, trained from childhood, equipped with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever produced. The idea that a Threll commander, decorated with more honors than almost anyone in the chamber, had faced humans in actual combat seemed impossible. "You misunderstand me," Counselor Tallis said carefully, clearly trying to keep the peace. "No one doubts your service, Commander, but surely you jest. Humanity has no history of conflict with the Alliance. That is because the Alliance made sure no one ever learned the truth," Vesic said. A murmur rippled through the room again, this time filled with confusion rather than curiosity. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his heart pounding. He had grown up hearing stories about humanity's peaceful reputation among the stars, stories that painted Earth as a young, harmless civilization still finding its place in a much larger universe. He had never once considered that this reputation might be built on something hidden. Laura placed a hand on his arm. "Daniel, she whispered. What is he talking about? He shook his head. I have no idea. Vesic rose from his seat, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the table. He walked slowly toward the center of the chamber, his boots echoing with each step. The other delegates watched him in stunned silence, none daring to interrupt. Many years ago, he began, before most of you held your current positions, before some of you were even born, there was a conflict along the outer border, near a human settlement. It was small, it was contained, and it was erased from every official record the Alliance keeps. Counselor Talus's expression shifted from mild confusion to genuine concern. Commander, if this is true, why speak of it now? Vesic turned to face the human delegation directly. His eyes, cold and steady, locked onto Daniel and Laura. Because I am tired of watching my people mock a species I know to be far more dangerous than any of you understand. I have kept silent for years out of shame. Today, I choose to stop. The chamber erupted into quiet chaos. Delegates whispering urgently to one another, some standing from their seats, others demanding clarification. Daniel sat frozen, unsure whether to feel proud, afraid, or simply confused. Every instinct told him that whatever Vesic was about to reveal would change everything he thought he knew about humanity's place among the stars. Laura leaned closer to him. Do you think it's true? She asked quietly. Daniel did not answer right away. He watched Vesic Thorn's face, searching for any sign of exaggeration or deceit, but found none. The commander's expression carried no trace of storytelling flair, no performance meant to entertain a crowd. It was the look of someone recalling something deeply personal, something that had shaped the rest of his life. I think, Daniel finally said, that we're about to hear something no human has ever been told. Counselor Talus raised a hand, calling for order. Slowly, the murmurs died down, though the tension in the room remained thick enough to cut with a blade. All eyes returned to Vesic Thorn, who stood at the center of the chamber like a soldier, preparing to deliver a final report to his superiors. I will tell you what happened, he said, not because I seek forgiveness, and not because I wish to frighten anyone. I will tell you, because the galaxy has built its understanding of humanity on a lie, and lies, however comfortable, eventually collapse under their own weight. Daniel felt a chill run through him. Across the chamber, other human delegates who had been quietly observing the meeting from the back rows began to lean forward, sensing that something historic was about to unfold. Even the Threll delegates, usually so composed and confident, appeared uneasy, as though they too were hearing this story for the first time. Vesic took a slow breath, the kind of breath a person takes before stepping into difficult memory. It began on a routine patrol, he said. My unit was assigned to monitor a disputed region near a small human colony, a place most of you have never heard of, because it no longer appears on any star chart. We expected no resistance. We had been told humans did not maintain any meaningful defense capability in that sector. He paused, his jaw tightening. We were wrong. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Daniel realized he was holding his breath. Beside him, Laura had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on the alien commander, as though nothing else in the universe existed at that moment. What happened next, Vesic continued, changed how I understood strength, courage, and the true nature of your species. It is not a story easily told in a single breath, and I ask for your patience as I share it in full. Counselor Talus, still visibly shaken, gave a small nod. Please, Commander, continue. And so, with the entire council chamber hanging on his every word, Commander Vesic Thorn began to recount a story that had remained buried for decades, a story that was about to reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity forever. Daniel glanced once more at Laura, then at the rows of alien delegates leaning forward in their seats, then finally back at Vesic. Whatever came next, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing about how the galaxy viewed his species would ever be the same again. Our fleet arrived at the edge of the colony's defense perimeter, under standard procedure, Vesic said, his voice steady but distant, as though he were watching the memory unfold again in front of him. We carried 3 warships, each one built for rapid strikes against poorly defended targets. Intelligence reports told us the colony had minimal defenses, a handful of outdated patrol vessels, and a population unprepared for any form of conflict. We expected to secure the region within a single day. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though even now, years later, the memory still puzzled him. The moment we entered the system, everything changed. Daniel leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Around him, the chamber remained utterly silent, every delegate hanging on the commander's every word. Even Counselor Tallis, usually quick to interject with procedural remarks, sat motionless, his attention fully absorbed. Our scanners detected nothing unusual at first, Vesic continued. No large fleet, no orbital defense platforms, nothing that matched the threat level we were trained to expect from a true military power. We proceeded toward the colony exactly as planned, and then, without warning, our lead ship lost all power. A murmur passed through the chamber, quickly silenced by Tallis's raised hand. We assumed a technical failure, Vesic said. It happens, even with our advanced systems. But within moments, our second ship reported the same failure. Complete shutdown of primary systems. Weapons offline, propulsion offline, communication offline. Only the smallest backup systems remained functional. We had no understanding of what was happening. He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture rigid, almost formal, as though delivering an official report to superiors long since gone. It was not a malfunction, he said. It was a trap. Daniel's mind raced. He had studied Earth's history extensively, as part of his diplomatic training, yet he had never come across any account of a conflict involving disabled starships or hidden defense systems. Whatever Vesic was describing existed nowhere in any record he had ever seen. The humans had developed a method of disrupting our primary systems from a hidden position on the surface, Vesic explained. We later learned it involved a specialized field generator, something none of our scientists had previously considered possible, given the technology we believed humans possessed. It became clear almost immediately that our intelligence reports had drastically underestimated this colony's capabilities. Celavre, still seated near the commander's empty chair, spoke up cautiously. "Commander, if your ships lost power, how did the confrontation continue? Surely you would have retreated." "We attempted to," Vesic said, "but retreat was no longer an option. Our propulsion systems remained offline for nearly 6 hours. During that time, we were completely vulnerable, drifting in open space above a colony we had underestimated in every possible way." He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the chamber, before settling once more on the human delegation. "I expected them to attack while we were defenseless," he said. "It would have been the logical choice. Instead, nothing happened. No weapons fired. No ships approached. For 6 hours, we sat in silence, uncertain whether we were about to face destruction or simply wait out whatever strategy they had planned." Daniel exchanged a glance with Laura. Neither of them spoke, both too absorbed in the story to interrupt. "When our systems finally came back online," Vesic continued, "we discovered a single vessel waiting at a cautious distance from our fleet. It was small, far smaller than any of our warships, clearly built for defense, rather than offense. A transmission came through, requesting a diplomatic exchange rather than immediate combat." "They wanted to talk?" Counselor Tallis asked, clearly surprised. "They wanted to avoid unnecessary conflict," Vesic said. "At the time, I saw this as weakness. I believed they feared engaging us directly, that they understood the disparity in raw firepower between our forces and theirs, and sought to delay the inevitable through diplomacy. I was young then, eager to prove myself, confident in the superiority of Threll technology and training. I convinced my superiors that this hesitation on their part represented an opportunity rather than a warning." He exhaled slowly, the memory clearly weighing on him even now. "We proceeded toward the surface with a small tactical force, intending to establish a foothold before the colony could organize any meaningful resistance. I led that force myself." The chamber remained utterly still. Daniel found himself unconsciously holding his breath, waiting for whatever came next. "The surface of the colony was quiet," Vesic said, "too quiet. We expected to encounter civilian structures, perhaps minimal security personnel, based on our intelligence reports. Instead, we found a landscape carefully designed for defense, though disguised as ordinary terrain." hills that provided natural cover, structures positioned at angles that limited approach routes. It became clear, far too late, that we had walked directly into a prepared position. Cale Dorn, a younger diplomat seated near the back of the chamber, finally spoke, his voice hesitant but curious. "Commander, forgive my confusion, but you described defensive preparation, not aggression. Why does this trouble you so deeply even now?" Vesic turned to face him directly, his expression hardening. "Because what followed taught me that humanity does not fight the way we expect an opponent to fight," he said. "They do not rely purely on strength or numbers. They adapt. They plan for outcomes we never consider. And when conflict becomes unavoidable, they commit to it with a level of determination I have never witnessed in any other species, including my own." He returned to his seat, though he did not sit down, instead resting one hand on the back of the chair, as though needing something solid to hold on to, while continuing his account. "Our tactical force advanced toward what we believed to be the primary settlement structure," he said. "We anticipated resistance from a handful of poorly trained defenders, if any resistance at all. Instead, we encountered a coordinated response unlike anything covered in our military training." "What do you mean by coordinated?" Daniel asked, unable to stop himself from speaking. Every delegate turned to look at him, but he did not look away from Vesic. The commander studied him for a long moment before answering. "I mean that within minutes of our advance, we found ourselves surrounded by defenders who anticipated our exact movements. Positions that should have offered us cover, instead left us exposed. Routes we believed unguarded were the most heavily defended points on the entire perimeter. It was as though they had studied our tactical doctrine long before we ever arrived in their system." Laura frowned. "That doesn't make sense. How could they have known your strategies in advance?" "That question troubled me for years," Vesic admitted. "It was not until much later that I understood the answer. They had not studied our specific doctrine. They had studied the fundamental principles behind how any technologically superior force approaches a smaller target. They understood, on a level few species ever achieve, how to think several steps ahead of an opponent who believes victory is already guaranteed." He paused again, and for the first time since beginning his account, his composure wavered slightly. "We lost communication with a third of our force within the first hour," he said quietly. "Not through overwhelming firepower, but through precise, calculated positioning that neutralized our advantages one by one. Every assumption we carried into that engagement proved false. We believed our numbers would guarantee success. We believed our technology would compensate for any tactical disadvantage. We were wrong on every count." The chamber remained silent, the weight of his words settling over every delegate present. Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride and unease building within him, emotions he had never expected to feel while listening to an account of ancient conflict involving his own species. "I want to be clear," Vesic said, addressing the entire room now, rather than any single individual. "This was not a battle we lost due to poor leadership or insufficient training. My forces were among the most decorated units within the Alliance at that time. We had faced numerous engagements across dozens of worlds, each time emerging victorious through superior strategy and overwhelming strength. Nothing in our experience prepared us for what we encountered that day." Counselor Tallis, his voice quieter now, almost reverent, asked, "What happened next, Commander?" Vesic looked toward the human delegation once more, his gaze lingering on Daniel and Laura before sweeping across the rest of the room. "What happened next," he said, "is something I have never spoken aloud until this very moment. And once I do, I suspect nothing in this chamber, or across the wider galaxy, will ever look at humanity the same way again." He straightened his posture, drawing in a long breath, preparing to continue what had already become the most extraordinary revelation the council chamber had witnessed in generations. "By the second hour of the engagement," Vesic said, "my remaining forces had been pushed back toward a narrow ridge overlooking the settlement. I remember the moment clearly, because it was the first time in my career that I genuinely believed we might not survive the encounter. We had lost contact with our support ships in orbit. Our ground communications were being jammed by a technology we did not understand. And still, the humans defending that colony had not fired a single weapon capable of causing lasting harm to my soldiers." Celovray tilted her head, clearly confused. They avoided lethal engagement entirely. For as long as they possibly could, Vesic confirmed. It became apparent, though I did not understand it at the time, that their goal was never to destroy us. Their goal was to convince us to withdraw without further conflict. Every tactic they used was designed to disable, disorient, or reposition our forces, rather than eliminate them outright. It was a level of restraint I had never encountered from any opposing force, and it confused my soldiers far more than open aggression would have. Daniel found himself nodding slightly without realizing it, a strange sense of recognition settling over him. He had always known humanity valued restraint and diplomacy, but hearing it described from the perspective of an opposing military commander gave the concept a weight he had never fully appreciated. I ordered my remaining forces to hold the ridge, Vesic continued. I believed, foolishly, that if we simply endured long enough, reinforcements from our orbital fleet would eventually break through whatever technology the humans were using to disable our systems. I was determined not to retreat, not out of strategic necessity, but out of pride. I did not want to be remembered as the commander who fled from a supposedly inferior species. He shook his head slowly, as though even now the memory embarrassed him. That decision very nearly cost every soldier under my command their lives. The chamber remained utterly still, no one daring to interrupt. As the hours passed, Vesic said, the humans adjusted their approach. They recognized we would not withdraw willingly, and so they shifted from a strategy of avoidance to one of controlled pressure. Small teams, no more than 4 or 5 individuals each, began moving through the terrain around our position, with a level of coordination that felt almost impossible given their limited numbers. They used the natural landscape far more effectively than we ever could have anticipated, striking briefly, then disappearing before we could organize any meaningful response. How is that possible? Cale Dorn asked. Your soldiers were equipped with advanced detection systems, were they not? We were, Vesic confirmed. And yet, time and again, we found ourselves reacting to threats only after they had already achieved their objective. I began to understand, slowly and painfully, that we were not dealing with a species relying purely on raw technological advantage. We were dealing with a species that had spent generations refining the art of adaptability itself. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. There is a particular moment from that engagement I have never forgotten, he said. As night fell over the colony, my remaining forces numbered barely half of what we had brought to the surface. Morale had collapsed. Several of my soldiers, seasoned veterans who had never once shown fear in any previous engagement, began openly questioning whether we would survive until morning. It was during this moment that I encountered, for the first time, direct contact with a human soldier. Daniel's breath caught slightly. Around him, the entire chamber seemed to lean forward as one. She approached our position alone, Vesic said. Unarmed, hands visible, moving with a calmness that unsettled me more than any weapon could have. My soldiers raised their weapons instinctively, prepared to eliminate the threat immediately, but something about her demeanor made me hesitate. I ordered them to hold their fire. What did she want? Laura asked quietly. She wanted to speak, Vesic said. Nothing more. She introduced herself simply, offered no rank, no unit designation, nothing that would allow us to gather meaningful intelligence from the encounter. She explained, calmly and directly, that further conflict served no purpose for either side. She told me that her people had no desire to destroy my soldiers, but that they would continue defending their home for as long as necessary, regardless of the cost to themselves. He fell silent for a moment, his gaze distant. I remember asking her why her people had not simply retreated to the safety of the settlement's deepest structures, allowing us to seize the outer perimeter without further conflict. Her answer has remained with me every day since. What did she say? Counselor Tallis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vesic's expression grew somber. She said that retreat was not a strategy her people relied upon when defending what mattered most to them. She said humans had learned, through difficult experience across their own history, that hesitation in the face of a threat to their home often cost more in the long term than the risks of standing firm. She told me, quite plainly, that her people did not need to match our technology or our numbers, because they had already decided, individually and collectively, that they would not yield. The chamber remained silent, every delegate absorbing the weight of his words. I did not fully understand her meaning at the time, Vesic admitted. I dismissed it as stubbornness, perhaps even foolishness. It was not until the following morning, when our reinforcements finally broke through the disruption field and rejoined our position, that I began to understand the true scale of what we had encountered. What do you mean? Celavray asked. I mean that by the time our full fleet regained control of the situation, the human forces defending that colony had, through careful strategy and unwavering resolve, made the cost of continued conflict simply too high to justify. My superiors, upon reviewing the full report of our losses, made the decision to withdraw entirely from the region, rather than commit additional resources to a conflict that offered little strategic value in exchange for continued losses. He looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of nearly every delegate present. We left that system quietly, he said. No formal treaty was signed. No public acknowledgement of the conflict was ever made. The Alliance simply erased the engagement from official records, choosing instead to maintain the narrative that humanity posed no meaningful threat to any established power in known space. I was ordered, along with every soldier who survived that encounter, never to speak of what had happened. Daniel felt a lump forming in his throat. He had never once considered that his species carried a history capable of commanding this kind of respect, however quietly it had been buried. Why obey that order for so long? Cale Dorn asked. Surely, as a decorated commander, your testimony would have carried significant weight even then. Vesic's expression hardened slightly. Because admitting the truth meant admitting failure. It meant acknowledging that a species we had underestimated so completely had, through sheer determination and adaptability, forced one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy into a quiet, humiliating withdrawal. Pride, I have come to understand, can silence truth far more effectively than any direct order ever could. He turned once more toward the human delegation, his expression softening slightly for the first time since beginning his account. I have carried this story for many years, he said. I have watched countless delegates from countless worlds speak of humanity with dismissive amusement, unaware of what I witnessed on that ridge so long ago. I have remained silent out of shame, and I recognize now that my silence has done a disservice not only to the truth, but to the very species I once believed I understood. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady despite the emotion building within him. Commander, why choose today to reveal this? What changed? Vesic studied him for a long moment before answering. Because I grow tired of watching history repeat itself in smaller ways, again and again, across countless diplomatic gatherings. I grow tired of watching my own people underestimate a species capable of far greater resilience than any of us wish to acknowledge. Today, listening to yet another round of dismissive jokes at humanity's expense, I realized that continued silence made me complicit in a lie I no longer wish to carry. The chamber remained still, the full weight of his testimony settling over every delegate present. Even the most seasoned diplomats, individuals accustomed to hearing dramatic accounts from across the galaxy, appeared visibly shaken by what they had just heard. Counselor Tallis finally broke the silence, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. Commander Thorne, if what you describe is accurate, this changes the fundamental understanding this council has maintained regarding humanity's place among the galactic community. Such a revelation carries significant political consequences. I am aware, Vesic said simply, and I accept whatever consequences follow from speaking this truth. I have carried the weight of silence long enough. It is time the galaxy understood exactly what kind of species it has so casually dismissed for all these years. Daniel looked toward Laura, both of them struggling to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Around the chamber, delegates began whispering urgently to one another. The earlier atmosphere of light diplomatic amusement replaced entirely by a growing sense of unease. For the first time since the session began, no one in the chamber was laughing. News of Commander Thorne's testimony spread through the diplomatic network faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within hours, transcripts of the council session had reached embassies across a dozen systems, passed quietly between staff members who could not resist sharing what they had witnessed. By the following morning, what had begun as a single moment of confession inside a quiet chamber had transformed into a topic of urgent discussion across the wider galactic community. Daniel Cross barely slept that night. He sat in his quarters aboard the diplomatic station, replaying every word of Vesik's account in his mind, unable to shake the feeling that everything he had once understood about humanity's place among the stars had shifted beneath him. Laura Bennett arrived at his door shortly after sunrise, her expression tense. "Have you seen the reports?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Which ones?" Daniel replied. "There seem to be dozens circulating already." "All of them," Laura said. "Every major delegation has requested clarification from the Threll Alliance regarding Commander Thorne's statements. Some are demanding official records, others are questioning whether similar incidents have occurred with other alien powers and simply never been disclosed." Daniel rubbed his eyes, still processing the sheer scale of what had unfolded. "Do you think other species have their own hidden encounters with us? Stories buried the same way the Alliance buried theirs?" Laura hesitated before answering. "I think it's possible, and if even a fraction of those stories exist, humanity's reputation across known space is about to change in ways we can't fully predict." Across the station, similar conversations were unfolding among diplomats from a dozen different worlds. In one of the station's private meeting rooms, Counselor Bren Tallis sat across from two senior officials from a neighboring alliance, both of whom had requested an urgent meeting following the previous day's revelations. "You must understand our position," said one official, a tall, pale-skinned diplomat named Oren Vask. "For decades, our own military doctrine has assumed humanity poses no significant threat in any direct engagement. Entire defense strategies across multiple sectors have been built upon that assumption. If Commander Thorne's account is accurate, we may need to reconsider policies that have shaped interstellar relations for generations." Tallis folded his hands carefully. "I understand the concern, but I would caution against overreaction. A single engagement, however significant, does not necessarily reflect the full capability of an entire species." "With respect, Counselor," Oren Vask replied, "a single engagement involving one of the most decorated commanders in Threll history, resulting in a quiet, unacknowledged withdrawal, is not something easily dismissed as an isolated incident." The conversation continued for hours, mirroring similar discussions taking place simultaneously across numerous other diplomatic channels. Military analysts from several alliances began quietly requesting access to historical records involving human settlements, searching for any indication of previously unexplained losses or unusual troop withdrawals near Earth's territories. Meanwhile, aboard a separate section of the station, Commander Vesik Thorne found himself facing consequences he had anticipated but not fully prepared for. Summoned before a panel of senior Threll military officials, he stood at attention in a private briefing room as three generals studied him with expressions ranging from disappointment to open suspicion. "You understand the position you have placed the Alliance in," said General Drazakor, the most senior officer present. "Decades of carefully maintained diplomatic strategy, undone by a single confession made in a public forum." "I understand," Vesik replied evenly. "I do not regret my decision." "You should," another officer snapped. "Do you have any concept of how many trade agreements, defense treaties, and territorial arrangements were built upon the assumption of human inferiority? You have handed every rival alliance in known space a reason to question our judgment." Vesik remained composed despite the mounting pressure. "With respect, General, continued silence would have eventually led to the same outcome, only through less honorable means. Truth, however inconvenient, tends to surface eventually. I chose to control how and when that truth was revealed, rather than allow it to emerge through less favorable circumstances." The generals exchanged uneasy glances, none willing to openly disagree with his reasoning, despite their obvious displeasure with the situation. "There will be consequences for this," General Kor finally said. "Your rank and honors remain intact for now, given your service record, but do not expect leniency should further complications arise from this disclosure." "Understood, General," Vesik replied simply. As the meeting concluded and Vesik was dismissed, he found Daniel Cross waiting for him just outside the briefing room, having requested access through official diplomatic channels. "Commander," Daniel said, his tone respectful but direct, "I wanted to speak with you, if you're willing." Vesik studied him for a moment, before nodding. "Walk with me." The two moved through the station's quiet corridors, the earlier chaos of diplomatic panic replaced temporarily by the hum of ventilation systems and distant conversation. I need to understand something, Daniel said. Why trust us with this information? You could have simply resigned quietly, allowed the story to remain buried, and avoided the consequences you're now facing. Vesic considered the question carefully before responding. Because your species deserves to understand its own history, even the parts hidden from you by those who feared what that history might mean. I have spent years watching humanity dismissed, mocked, and underestimated by nearly every power in this galaxy. I could not, in good conscience, continue contributing to that pattern. Daniel absorbed this for a moment. Do you regret it? Even now, seeing how quickly things have escalated. No, Vesic said firmly. I regret only the years I spent remaining silent. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Ethan Cole, a senior member of the human diplomatic staff, moving quickly toward them with an urgent expression. Daniel, Ethan said, slightly out of breath. You need to come to the main communication hub immediately. Multiple delegations are requesting formal statements from Earth's government regarding Commander Thorne's testimony. This is no longer contained to a single council session. It's becoming a full diplomatic crisis. Daniel exchanged a brief glance with Vesic before following Ethan through the station's corridors toward the communication hub. Inside, the room buzzed with activity, screens displaying incoming messages from dozens of different systems, each requesting clarification, verification, or formal commentary on the unfolding situation. Grace Whitfield, the senior diplomat overseeing Earth's delegation, stood at the center of the room, coordinating responses with practiced calm, despite the mounting pressure. Daniel, she said, spotting him immediately. I need your assessment. You were present during the original testimony. How credible do you believe Commander Thorne's account to be? Completely credible, Daniel said without hesitation. There was no indication of exaggeration or performance in his account. If anything, he seemed reluctant to share details, as though the memory itself carried significant personal weight. Grace nodded slowly, absorbing this information. That aligns with initial assessments from other delegations present during the session. The question now becomes how Earth chooses to respond to this sudden shift in galactic perception. What options do we have? Laura asked, having joined the group moments earlier. Several, Grace replied. We could downplay the incident, emphasizing our continued commitment to peaceful diplomacy despite the revelation. We could embrace the moment, using it to strengthen Earth's negotiating position across multiple ongoing treaty discussions. Or we could remain neutral, allowing the situation to unfold naturally without direct intervention from our delegation. The room fell into a brief, tense silence as everyone considered the implications of each approach. I believe, Daniel said carefully, that our response should reflect who we actually are, rather than who others have assumed us to be. We should not exaggerate our capabilities, nor should we downplay them out of fear of appearing threatening. Simple honesty, matching the honesty Commander Thorne showed us, seems the most appropriate path forward. Grace studied him for a long moment, before nodding slowly. A reasonable perspective. I will take it under advisement. Over the following days, the ripple effects of Vesic's testimony continued spreading across known space. Several alliances quietly began reviewing historical records for any indication of previously undisclosed encounters with human forces. In two separate cases, minor incidents involving unexplained troop withdrawals near human territories were uncovered, though official explanations remained vague and unconvincing. Meanwhile, public sentiment across various alien worlds began shifting in noticeable ways. Where humanity had once been the subject of casual jokes and dismissive commentary, a new tone of cautious curiosity began emerging instead. Media outlets across several systems ran extensive coverage analyzing Commander Thorne's account, some treating it with skepticism, others with genuine concern regarding the broader implications for interstellar relations. Back aboard the diplomatic station, Daniel found himself increasingly sought out by representatives from other delegations, each eager to gain insight into humanity's true capabilities from someone who had witnessed the revelation firsthand. It's strange, Laura remarked one evening as the two sat together in the station's observation lounge, watching distant stars drift slowly across the darkened viewport. A week ago, no one paid us much attention beyond routine trade discussions. Now it feels like every conversation carries an unspoken question beneath the surface. What question? Daniel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "What else are you hiding?" Laura said quietly. Daniel considered this for a long moment before responding. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe it's time the galaxy started taking us seriously, not as a threat, but as equals worth genuine consideration. Laura offered a small, uncertain smile. "Let's hope that's how this plays out." As the days continued passing, it became increasingly clear that Commander Thorne's testimony had permanently altered the trajectory of interstellar diplomacy. What had once been a simple, dismissive narrative surrounding humanity's place among the stars had cracked open, revealing a far more complicated truth beneath the surface, one that countless species across the galaxy were now being forced to reckon with for the very first time. 3 weeks after Commander Thorne's testimony first echoed through the council chamber, the diplomatic station buzzed with an energy unlike anything Daniel Cross had experienced since arriving at his post. What had begun as a single moment of confession had grown into something far larger, reshaping conversations, treaties, and alliances across dozens of systems. Daniel stood near the observation deck, watching as delegations from newly arrived worlds disembarked from their vessels, many of them requesting formal meetings with Earth's representatives for the first time in recorded diplomatic history. Where previous gatherings had drawn only a handful of curious officials, entire delegations now arrived specifically seeking to understand humanity's true nature. Grace Whitfield approached him, a datapad in hand, her expression carrying the weary satisfaction of someone who had spent weeks navigating an unprecedented diplomatic shift. "Another formal request," she said, handing him the pad. "This one from the Velmori Accord. They're requesting a joint military exercise, something previously unimaginable, given their historical reluctance to engage with smaller powers." Daniel scanned the message, genuinely surprised by its contents. "They want to study our tactical doctrine?" "They want to understand it," Grace corrected. "There's a difference. After Commander Thorne's account became public knowledge, several alliances began questioning whether their existing assumptions about smaller, less technologically advanced species deserved reconsideration. Humanity has become something of a case study in unexpected resilience." "That's a strange kind of reputation to inherit," Daniel said. "Strange, perhaps," Grace replied, "but not necessarily unwelcome. Respect, even when born from unease, tends to open doors that dismissiveness never could." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Laura Bennett, who approached with visible excitement. "You need to see this," she said, gesturing toward a nearby view screen displaying an incoming transmission request. Daniel followed her toward the communication terminal, where a familiar figure appeared on the screen moments later. Commander Vesic Thorne, still dressed in his formal Threll uniform, though carrying a noticeably lighter expression than the tense, burdened demeanor Daniel remembered from their first encounter. "Commander," Daniel said, genuinely pleased to see him. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you again so soon." "Circumstances have shifted rather quickly," Vesic replied, a faint hint of dry humor in his tone. "It seems my testimony has generated considerably more attention than anticipated." "How are things within the Alliance?" Laura asked cautiously. Vesic's expression grew slightly more serious. "Divided, if I am honest. Many within our leadership remain displeased with my decision, viewing it as an unnecessary complication to long-standing diplomatic strategy. Others, particularly among younger officers, have expressed genuine curiosity regarding what my testimony reveals about the broader nature of interstellar conflict." "And you?" Daniel asked. "How are you handling everything?" "Better than expected," Vesic admitted. "I anticipated far harsher consequences for speaking openly. Instead, I find myself increasingly consulted by military strategists, eager to better understand human tactical philosophy. It appears my honesty, however disruptive initially, has proven valuable in ways I did not fully anticipate." Grace stepped closer to the terminal, addressing Vesic directly. "Commander, on behalf of Earth's delegation, I would like to formally extend an invitation. We are organizing a series of discussions intended to foster clearer understanding between our species and the wider galactic community. Your presence, given your unique perspective, would be invaluable." Vesic considered the offer for a long moment before responding. "I accept, though I suspect my continued involvement will further complicate my standing within the Alliance." "Sometimes," Grace replied, Meaningful change requires exactly that kind of complication. Over the following weeks, a series of formal discussions took place aboard the diplomatic station, drawing representatives from an increasing number of alien worlds, eager to better understand humanity's history, capabilities, and intentions. Commander Thorne attended several of these sessions personally, offering first-hand insight that no official record could adequately convey. During one particularly significant gathering, a representative from the Velmori Accord, a tall, silver-skinned diplomat named Idris Kale, posed a question that seemed to capture the sentiment shared by many delegates present. "Commander Thorne," Idris said, "given your first-hand experience, how would you characterize humanity's true nature? Are they a threat to be feared, or simply a species capable of unexpected resilience under pressure?" Vesic considered the question carefully before responding. "Neither characterization fully captures the truth. Humanity is not inherently aggressive, nor do they seek conflict for its own sake. What I witnessed was not a species eager for war, but one entirely unwilling to abandon what mattered most to them, regardless of the odds against them. That distinction, I believe, deserves far greater respect than fear." Daniel, seated among the human delegation, felt a quiet swell of pride at hearing his species described in such terms by someone who had once stood against them in direct conflict. As the discussions continued, subtle shifts began appearing across broader galactic policy. Several alliances quietly revised long-standing treaties involving human territories, adjusting language that had previously assumed minimal negotiating leverage on Earth's part. Trade agreements once heavily favoring alien powers began reflecting more balanced terms, a direct result of humanity's newly established reputation. Not every reaction, however, remained positive. Some factions within various alliances grew increasingly uneasy with humanity's shifting status, viewing the newfound respect as a potential future threat rather than an opportunity for improved relations. Daniel became aware of this growing tension during a private conversation with Ethan Cole, who had been closely monitoring diplomatic sentiment across multiple sectors. "Not everyone is thrilled about this shift," Ethan warned one evening as the two reviewed incoming reports together. "Some delegations view increased human influence as a destabilizing factor, something to be contained rather than embraced." "Do you think that poses a genuine risk?" Daniel asked. "Possibly," Ethan admitted, "though I suspect most rational leaders understand that attempting to suppress humanity's growing reputation at this point would likely cause more harm than simply adapting to it." Despite lingering pockets of unease, the overall trajectory of interstellar relations continued shifting steadily in humanity's favor. Earth's delegation, once relegated to minor diplomatic gatherings, increasingly found itself invited to significant discussions previously reserved exclusively for established galactic powers. Nearly 2 months after Commander Thorne's initial testimony, Daniel found himself once again seated within the very council chamber, where everything had begun. The atmosphere, however, carried none of the dismissive amusement present during that first fateful session. Delegates from a dozen worlds sat attentively, their earlier condescension replaced by careful, measured respect. Counselor Bren Tallis opened the session with a brief acknowledgement of how significantly circumstances had shifted since Commander Thorne's revelation. "It is rare," he said, "that a single testimony reshapes the fundamental understanding shared across an entire diplomatic community. Yet here we stand, forced to reconsider assumptions many of us held for generations." Vesic Thorne, seated once again near the front of the chamber, rose briefly to address the gathered delegates. "I do not regret the consequences my testimony has brought upon myself personally," he said. "If anything, I regret only that it took so long for the truth to surface. Humanity deserves recognition, not as a threat to be feared, nor as a curiosity to be dismissed, but as a species whose resilience and determination merit genuine respect." As the session continued, Daniel found himself called upon directly for the first time, invited to share his own perspective as a member of Earth's diplomatic delegation. "I believe," Daniel began, his voice steady despite the weight of so many eyes upon him, "that what Commander Thorne's testimony truly reveals is not simply a hidden chapter of galactic history, but a broader truth about how easily assumptions can shape perception, regardless of their accuracy. My species has spent generations navigating a galaxy that viewed us as insignificant, We never sought to prove otherwise through conflict or aggression. We simply continued building, growing, and protecting what mattered most to us, quietly and without expectation of recognition. He paused, glancing briefly toward Vesic before continuing. Perhaps the greatest lesson from all of this is not that humanity should be feared, but that no species, regardless of size or technological capability, should be dismissed without genuine understanding. Respect, when built upon truth rather than assumption, creates far stronger foundations for lasting cooperation than fear ever could. The chamber remained silent for a long moment following his statement, before Counselor Tallis finally nodded in quiet agreement. "Well said, Ambassador Cross. I believe this council would do well to remember those words moving forward." As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Daniel found himself approached once more by Vesic Thorn, who offered a rare, genuine smile. "You have a talent for diplomacy," Vesic remarked. "Perhaps even more than you realize." "I learned from watching someone brave enough to speak an uncomfortable truth," Daniel replied. "That kind of courage tends to leave a lasting impression." Vesic inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect between two individuals who, despite representing vastly different species, had come to understand one another through shared honesty rather than assumption. Outside the chamber, Laura Bennett waited alongside Grace Whitfield and Ethan Cole, all three watching as Daniel emerged alongside the very commander whose testimony had reshaped their understanding of humanity's place among the stars. "How does it feel?" Laura asked, "being part of something this significant?" Daniel considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Strange," he admitted. "A few months ago, no one paid much attention to humanity, beyond routine trade discussions. Now, entire alliances are reconsidering generations of assumptions because one commander decided honesty mattered more than pride. Do you think it changes things permanently?" Ethan asked. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "it changes how the galaxy chooses to see us. Whether that shift leads to greater cooperation or greater caution remains to be seen. But at the very least, humanity is no longer invisible among the stars. We are no longer simply dismissed as harmless. We are, for the first time in recorded diplomatic history, genuinely being considered." As the group made their way through the station's corridors, distant stars visible through the wide viewports lining the walls, Daniel found himself reflecting on everything that had unfolded since that first tense council session. Commander Thorne's decision to break years of silence had not simply revealed a hidden chapter of history. It had fundamentally altered how an entire galaxy chose to understand a species long underestimated. Somewhere aboard a different section of the station, Vesic Thorn stood alone, near a quiet viewport, watching the same distant stars, carrying the weight of consequences still unfolding from his choice to speak the truth. Yet despite the uncertainty ahead, he felt something he had not experienced in many years: relief. For the first time since that fateful engagement decades earlier, he no longer carried the burden of silence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever political consequences continued unfolding across the galaxy, he understood one thing with absolute certainty. The truth, however long delayed, had finally been spoken, and the galaxy, for better or worse, would never view humanity the same way again.